The Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 13. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars, by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 13. A Desperate Deed. Emed crossed the tower chamber toward Tara of Helium and the slave girl Lan-O. He seized the former roughly by a shoulder. "Stand," he commanded. Tara struck his hand from her and, rising, backed away. "Lay not your hand upon the person of a princess of Helium, beast," she warned. Emed laughed. "Think you that I play at Jetan for you without first knowing something of the stake for which I play?" he demanded. "Come here." The girl drew herself to her full height, folding her arms across her breast, nor did Emed note that the slim fingers of her right hand were inserted beneath the broad leather strap of her harness, where it passed over her left shoulder. "An Otar learns of this, you shall rue it," Emed cried the slave girl. "There be no law in Manator that gives you this girl before you shall have won her fairly." "What cares Otar for her fate?" replied Emed. "Have I not heard? Did she not flout the great Jeddak, heaping abuse upon him? By my first ancestor, I think Otar might make a Jed of the man who subdued her," and again he advanced toward Tara. "Wait," said the girl in low, even tone. "Perhaps you know not what you do. Sacred to the people of Helium are the persons of the women of Helium. For the honor of the humblest of them would the great Jeddak himself unsheath his sword. The greatest nations of Barsoom have trembled to the thunders of war in defense of the person of Dejah Thoris, my mother. We are but mortal and so may die, but we may not be defiled. You may play at Jetan for a princess of Helium, but though you win the match, never may you claim the reward. If thou wouldst possess a dead body, press me too far, but know, man of Manator, that the blood of the warlord flows not in the veins of Tara of Helium for naught. I have spoken. I know naught of Helium, and Otar is our warlord," replied Emed, "but I do know that I would examine more closely the prize that I shall play for and win. I would test the lips of her who is to be my slave after the next games. Nor is it well, woman, to drive me too far to anger." His eyes narrowed as he spoke, his visage taking on the semblance of that of a snarling beast. "If you doubt the truth of my words, ask Lan-O, the slave girl." "He speaks truly, O woman of Helium," interjected Lan-O. "Try not the temper of Emed if you value your life." But Tara of Helium made no reply. Already had she spoken. She stood in silence, now facing the burly warrior who approached her. He came close, and then, quite suddenly, he seized her and, bending, tried to draw her lips to his. Lan-O saw the woman from Helium half turn, and with a quick movement jerk her right hand from where it had lain upon her breast. She saw the hand shoot from beneath the arm of Emed and rise between his shoulder, and she saw in the hand a long, slim blade. The lips of the warrior were drawing closer to those of the woman, but they never touched them, for suddenly the man straightened, stiffly, a shriek upon his lips, and then he crumbled like an empty fur and lay a shrunken heap upon the floor. Tara of Helium stooped and wiped her blade upon his harness. Lan-O, wide-eyed, looked with horror upon the corpse. "For this we shall both die," she cried. "And who would live a slave in Manator?" asked Tara of Helium. "I am not so brave as thou," said the slave girl, "and life is sweet, and there is always hope." "Life is sweet," agreed Tara of Helium, "but honor is sacred. But do not fear. When they come I shall tell them the truth, that you had no hand in this, and no opportunity to prevent it." For a moment the slave girl seemed to be thinking deeply. Suddenly her eyes lighted. "There is a way, perhaps," she said, "to turn suspicion from us. He has the key to this chamber upon him. Let us open the door and drag him out. Maybe we shall find a place to hide him." "Good!" exclaimed Tara of Helium, and the two immediately set about the matter Lan O had suggested. Quickly they found the key and unlatched the door, and then, between them, they half carried, half dragged the corpse of E Med from the room and down the stairway to the next level, where Lan O said there were vacant chambers. The first door they tried was unlatched, and through this the two bore their grisly burden into a small room lighted by a single window. The apartment bore evidence of having been utilized as a living room rather than as a cell, being furnished with a degree of comfort and even luxury. The walls were paneled to a height of about 7 feet from the floor, while the plaster above and the ceiling were decorated with faded paintings of another day. As Tara's eyes ran quickly over the interior, her attention was drawn to a section of paneling that seemed to be separated at one edge from the piece next adjoining it. Quickly she crossed to it, discovering that one vertical edge of an entire panel projected a half-inch beyond the others. There was a possible explanation which piqued her curiosity, and acting upon its suggestion, she seized upon the projecting edge and pulled outward. Slowly the panel swung toward her, revealing a dark aperture in the wall behind. "Look, Lan O," she cried. "See what I have found, a hole in which we may hide the thing upon the floor." Lan O joined her, and together the two investigated the dark aperture, finding a small platform from which a narrow runway led downward into Stygian darkness. Thick dust covered the floor within the doorway, indicating that a great period of time had elapsed since human foot had trod it, a secret way, doubtless unknown to living Manatorians. Here they dragged the corpse of E Med, leaving it upon the platform, and as they left the dark and forbidden closet, Lan O would have slammed to the panel had not Tara prevented. "Wait," she said, and fell to examining the door frame and the stile. "Hurry," whispered the slave girl. "If they come, we are lost." "It may serve us well to know how to open this place again," replied Tara of Helium, and then suddenly she pressed a foot against the section of the carved base at the right of the open panel. "Ah," she breathed, a note of satisfaction in her tone, and closed the panel until it fitted snugly in its place. "Come," she said, and turned toward the outer doorway of the chamber. They reached their own cell without detection, and closing the door, Tara locked it from the inside and placed the key in a secret pocket in her harness. "Let them come," she said. "Let them question us. What could two poor prisoners know of the whereabouts of their noble jailer? I ask you, Lan O, what could they?" "Nothing," admitted Lan O, smiling with her companion. "Tell me of these men of Manator," said Tara presently. "Are they all like E Med, or are some of them like A Kor, who seemed a brave and chivalrous character?" "They are not unlike the peoples of other countries," replied Lan O. "There be among them both good and bad. They are brave warriors and mighty. Among themselves they are not without chivalry and honor, but in their dealings with strangers they know but one law, the law of might. The weak and unfortunate of other lands fill them with contempt and arouse all that is worst in their natures, which doubtless accounts for their treatment of us, their slaves." "But why should they feel contempt for those who have suffered the misfortune of falling into their hands?" queried Tara. "I do not know," said Lan O. "A Kor says that he believes that it is because their country has never been invaded by a victorious foe. In their stealthy raids never have they been defeated, because they have never waited to face a powerful force, and so they have come to believe themselves invincible, and the other peoples are held in contempt as inferior in valor and the practice of arms." "Yet A Kor is one of them," said Tara. "He is a son of O Tar the Jeddak," replied Lan O, "but his mother was a high born Gatholian, captured and made slave by O Tar, and A Kor boasts that in his veins runs only the blood of his mother, and indeed is he different from the others. His chivalry is of a gentler form, though not even his worst enemy has dared question his courage, while his skill with the sword and the spear and the thoat is famous throughout the length and breadth of Manator." "What think you they will do with him?" asked Tara of Helium. "Sentence him to the games," replied Lan O. "If O Tar be not greatly angered he may be sentenced to but a single game, in which case he may come out alive, but if O Tar wishes really to dispose of him he will be sentenced to the entire series, and no warrior has ever survived the full 10, or rather none who was under a sentence from O Tar." "What are the games? I do not understand," said Tara. "I have heard them speak of playing at jetan, but surely no one can be killed at jetan. We play it often at home." "But not as they play it in the arena at Manator," replied Lan O. "Come to the window," and together the two approached an aperture facing toward the east. Below her, Tara of Helium saw a great field entirely surrounded by the low building and the lofty towers of which that in which she was imprisoned was but a unit. About the arena were tiers of seats, but the thing that caught her attention was a gigantic jetan board laid out upon the floor of the arena in great squares of alternate orange and black. Here they play at jetan with living pieces. They play for great stakes, and usually for a woman, some slave of exceptional beauty. O Tar himself might have played for you had you not angered him, but now you will be played for in an open game by slaves and criminals, and you will belong to the side that wins, not to a single warrior, but to all who survive the game." The eyes of Tara of Helium flashed, but she made no comment. "Those who direct the play do not necessarily take part in it," continued the slave girl, "but sit in those two great thrones which you see at either end of the board, and direct their pieces from square to square." "But where lies the danger?" asked Tara of Helium. "If a piece be taken it is merely removed from the board. This is a rule of jetan as old almost as the civilization of Barsoom." "But here in Manator, when they play in the great arena with living men, that rule is altered," explained Lan O. "When a warrior is moved to a square occupied by an opposing piece, the two battle to the death for possession of the square, and the one that is successful advantages by the move. Each is caparisoned to simulate the piece he represents, and in addition he wears that which indicates whether he be slave, a warrior serving a sentence, or a volunteer. If serving a sentence, the number of games he must play is also indicated, and thus the one directing the moves knows which pieces to risk and which to conserve. And further than this, a man's chances are affected by the position that is assigned him for the game. Those whom they wish to die are always panthans in the game, for the panthan has the least chance of surviving." "Do those who direct the play ever actually take part in it?" asked Tara. "Oh yes," said Lan O. "Often when two warriors, even of the highest class, hold a grievance against one another, O Tar compels them to settle it upon the arena. Then it is that they take active part, and with drawn swords direct their own players from the position of chief. They pick their own players, usually the best of their warriors and slaves, if they be powerful men who possess such, or their friends may volunteer, or they may obtain prisoners from the pits. These are games indeed, the very best that are seen. Often the great chiefs themselves are slain." "It is within this amphitheater that the justice of Manator is meted, then?" asked Tara. "Very largely," replied Lan O. "How then, through such justice, could a prisoner win his liberty?" continued the girl from Helium. "If a man and he survived 10 games his liberty would be his," replied Lan O. "But no one ever survives?" queried Tara. "And if a woman?" "No stranger within the gates of Manator ever has survived 10 games," replied the slave girl. "They are permitted to offer themselves into perpetual slavery if they prefer that to fighting at jetan. Of course they may be called upon, as any warrior, to take part in a game, but their chances then of surviving are increased, since they may never again have the chance of winning to liberty." "But a woman," insisted Tara. "How may a woman win her freedom?" Lan O laughed. "Very simply," she cried derisively. "She has but to find a warrior who will fight through 10 consecutive games for her and survive." "Just are the laws of Manator," quoted Tara scornfully. Then it was that they heard footsteps outside their cell, and a moment later a key turned in the lock and the door opened. A warrior faced them. "Hast seen Emed the dwar?" he asked. "Yes," replied Tara. "He was here some time ago." The man glanced quickly about the bare chamber, and then searchingly first at Tara of Helium and then at the slave girl, Lan O. The puzzled expression upon his face increased. He scratched his head. "It is strange," he said. "A score of men saw him ascend into this tower, and though there is but a single exit, and that well guarded, no man has seen him pass out." Tara of Helium hid a yawn with the back of a shapely hand. "The Princess of Helium is hungry, fellow," she drawled. "Tell your master that she would eat." It was an hour later that food was brought, an officer and several warriors accompanying the bearer. The former examined the room carefully, but there was no sign that aught amiss had occurred there. The wound that had sent Emed the dwar to his ancestors had not bled, fortunately for Tara of Helium. "Woman," cried the officer, turning upon Tara, "you were the last to see Emed the dwar. Answer me now, and answer me truthfully. Did you see him leave this room?" "I did," answered Tara of Helium. "Where did he go from here?" "How should I know? Think you that I can pass through a locked door of skeel?" The girl's tone was scornful. "Of that we do not know," said the officer. "Strange things have happened in the cell of your companion in the pits of Manator. Perhaps you could pass through a locked door of skeel as easily as he performs seemingly more impossible feats." "Whom do you mean?" she cried. "Turan the Panthan? He lives then? Tell me, is he here in Manator unharmed?" "I speak of that thing which calls itself Ghek the Kaldane," replied the officer. "But Turan? Tell me, Padwar, have you heard aught of him?" Tara's tone was insistent and she leaned a little forward toward the officer, her lips slightly parted in expectancy. Into the eyes of the slave girl, Lan O, who was watching her, there crept a soft light of understanding, but the officer ignored Tara's question. What was the fate of another slave to him? "Men do not disappear into thin air," he growled, "and if Emed be not found soon, O Tar himself may take a hand in this. I warn you, woman, if you be one of those horrid Corphals that by commanding the spirits of the wicked dead gains evil mastery over the living, as many now believe the thing called Ghek to be, that lest you return Emed, O Tar will have no mercy on you." "What foolishness is this?" cried the girl. "I am a princess of Helium, as I have told you all a score of times. Even if the fabled Corphals existed, as none but the most ignorant now believes, the lore of the ancients tells us that they entered only into the bodies of wicked criminals of the lowest class. Man of Manator, thou art a fool, and thy Jeddak and all his people," and she turned her royal back upon the Padwar and gazed through the window across the field of Jetan and the roofs of Manator through the low hills and the rolling country and freedom. "And you know so much of Corphals then," he cried. "You know that while no common man dare harm them, they may be slain by the hand of a Jeddak with impunity." The girl did not reply, nor would she speak again, for all his threats and rage, for she knew now that none in all Manator dared harm her save O Tar the Jeddak, and after a while the Padwar left, taking his men with him. And after they had gone, Tara stood for long looking out upon the city of Manator and wondering what more of cruel wrongs fate held in store for her. She was standing thus in silent meditation when there rose to her the strains of martial music from the city below, the deep, mellow tones of the long war trumpets of mounted troops, the clear, ringing notes of foot soldiers' music. The girl raised her head and looked about, listening, and Lan O, standing at an opposite window, looking toward the west, motioned Tara to join her. Now they could see across roofs and avenues to the Gate of Enemies, through which troops were marching into the city. "The great Jed is coming," said Lan O. "None other dares enter thus, with blaring trumpets, the city of Manator. It is U Thor, Jed of Manatos, second city of Manator. They call him the great Jed, the length and breadth of Manator, and because the people love him, O Tar hates him. They say who know that it would need but slight provocation to inflame the two to war. How such a war would end no one could guess, for the people of Manator worship the great O Tar, though they do not love him. U Thor they love, but he is not the jeddak," and Tara understood, as only a Martian may, how much that simple statement encompassed. The loyalty of a Martian to his jeddak is almost an instinct, and second not even to the instinct of self-preservation at that. Nor is this strange in a race whose religion includes ancestor worship, and where families trace their origin back into remote ages, and a jeddak sits upon the same throne that his direct progenitors have occupied for perhaps hundreds of thousands of years, and rules the descendants of the same people that his forebears ruled. Wicked jeddaks have been destroyed, but seldom are they replaced by other than members of the imperial house, even though the law gives to the jeds the right to select whom they please." "U Thor is a just man and good, then?" asked Tara of Helium. "There be none nobler," replied Lan O. "In Manatos none but wicked criminals who deserve death are forced to play at jetan, and even then the play is fair and they have their chance for freedom. Volunteers may play, but the moves are not necessarily to the death, a wound, and even sometimes points in swordplay deciding the issue. There they look upon jetan as a martial sport. Here it is but butchery. And U Thor is opposed to the ancient slave raids and to the policy that keeps Manator forever isolated from the other nations of Barsoom. But U Thor is not jeddak, and so there is no change." The two girls watched the column moving up the broad avenue from the Gate of Enemies toward the palace of O Tar, a gorgeous barbaric procession of painted warriors in jewel-studded harness and waving feathers, vicious, squealing thoats caparisoned in rich trappings. Far above their heads the long lances of their riders bore fluttering pennons, foot soldiers swinging easily along the stone pavement, their sandals of zitidar hide giving forth no sound, and at the rear of each utan a train of painted chariots, drawn by mammoth zitidars, carrying the equipment of the company to which they were attached. Utan after utan entered through the great gate, and even when the head of the column reached the palace of O Tar, they were not all within the city. "I have been here many years," said the girl Lan O, "but never have I seen even the great Jed bring so many fighting men into the city of Manator." Through half-closed eyes Tara of Helium watched the warriors marching up the broad avenue, trying to imagine them the fighting men of her beloved Helium coming to the rescue of their princess. That splendid figure upon the great thoat might be John Carter himself, warlord of Barsoom, and behind him utan after utan of the veterans of the empire, and then the girl opened her eyes again and saw the host of painted, befeathered barbarians, and sighed. But yet she watched, fascinated by the martial scene, and now she noted again the groups of silent figures upon the balconies. No waving silks, no cries of welcome, no showers of flowers and jewels such as would have marked the entry of such a splendid, friendly pageant into the twin cities of her birth. "The people do not seem friendly to the warriors of Manatos," she remarked to Lan O. "I have not seen a single welcoming sign from the people on the balconies." The slave girl looked at her in surprise. "It cannot be that you do not know," she exclaimed. Why, they are " But she got no further. The door swung open and an officer stood before them. "The slave girl, Tara, is summoned to the presence of O Tar the Jeddak," he announced. This is the end of the Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 13. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 14. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 14. At Ghek's Command. Turan, the Panthon, chafed in his chains. Time dragged. Silence and monotony prolonged minutes into hours. Uncertainty of the fate of the woman he loved turned each hour into an eternity of hell. He listened impatiently for the sound of approaching footsteps, that he might seek and speak to some living creature and learn, perchance, some word of Tara of Helium. After torturing hours, his ears were rewarded by the rattle of harness and arms. Men were coming. He waited breathlessly. Perhaps they were his executioners, but he would welcome them notwithstanding. He would question them, but if he knew naught of Tara, he would not divulge the location of the hiding place in which he had left her. Now they came, a half-dozen warriors and an officer, escorting an unarmed man, a prisoner, doubtless. Of this Turan was not left long in doubt, since they brought the newcomer and chained him to an adjoining ring. Immediately the Panthon commenced to question the officer in charge of the guard. "Tell me," he demanded, "why have I been made prisoner, and if other strangers were captured since I entered your city?" "What other prisoners?" asked the officer. "A woman and a man with a strange head," replied Turan. "It is possible," said the officer, "but what were their names?" "The woman was Tara, Princess of Helium, and the man was Ghek, a kaldane of Bantoom." "These were your friends?" asked the officer. "Yes," replied Turan. "It is what I would know," said the officer, and with a curt command to his men to follow him he turned and left the cell. "Tell me of them," cried Turan after him. "Tell me of Tara of Helium. Is she safe?" But the man did not answer, and soon the sound of their departure died in the distance. "Tara of Helium was safe but a short time since," said the prisoner chained by Turan's side. The Panthon turned toward the speaker, seeing a large man, handsome of face and with a manner both stately and dignified. "You have seen her?" he asked. "They captured her, then? She is in danger?" "She is being held in the towers of Jetan as a prize for the next games," replied the stranger. "And who are you?" asked Turan, "and why are you here, a prisoner?" "I am A Kor, the dwar, keeper of the towers of Jetan," replied the other. "I am here because I dared speak the truth of O Tar the Jeddak to one of his officers." "And your punishment?" asked Turan. "I do not know. O Tar has not yet spoken. Doubtless the games, perhaps the full 10, for O Tar does not love A Kor, his son." "You are the Jeddak's son?" asked Turan. "I am the son of O Tar and of a slave, Dejah of Gathol, who was a princess in her own land." Turan looked searchingly at the speaker. A son of Dejah of Gathol! A son of his mother's sister! This man, then, was his own cousin. Well did Gahan remember the mysterious disappearance of the Princess Dejah and an entire utan of her personal troops. She had been upon a visit far from the city of Gathol, and returning home had vanished with her whole escort from the sight of man. So this was the secret of the seeming mystery. Doubtless it explained many other similar disappearances that extended nearly as far back as the history of Gathol. Turan scrutinized his companion, discovering many evidences of resemblance to his mother's people. Acor might have been 10 years younger than he, but such differences in age are scarce accounted among a people who seldom or never age outwardly after maturity and whose span of life may be 1,000 years. "And where lies Gathol?" asked Turan. "Almost due east of Manator," replied Acor. "And how far?" "Some 21 degrees it is from the city of Manator to the city of Gathol," replied Acor, "but little more than 10 degrees between the boundaries of the two countries. Between them, though, there lies a country of torn rocks and yawning chasms." Well did Gahan know this country that bordered his upon the west. Even the ships of the air avoided it because of the treacherous currents that rose from the deep chasms and the almost total absence of safe landings. He knew now where Manator lay, and for the first time in long weeks the way to his own Gathol, and here was a man, a fellow prisoner, in whose veins flowed the blood of his own ancestors, a man who knew Manator, its people, its customs, and the country surrounding it, one who could aid him, with advice at least, to find a plan for the rescue of Tara of Helium and for escape. But would could he dare broach the subject? He could do no less than try. "And O Tar, you think, will sentence you to death?" he asked. "And why?" "He would like to," replied Acor, "for the people chafe beneath his iron hand, and their loyalty is but the loyalty of a people to the long line of illustrious Jedaks from which he has sprung. He is a jealous man, and has found the means of disposing of most of those whose blood might entitle them to a claim upon the throne, and whose place in the affections of the people endowed them with any political significance. The fact that I was the son of a slave relegated me to a position of minor importance in the consideration of O Tar, yet I am still the son of a Jeddak, and might sit upon the throne of Manator with as perfect congruity as O Tar himself. Combined with this is the fact that of recent years the people, and especially many of the young warriors, have evinced a growing affection for me, which I attribute to certain virtues of character and training derived from my mother, but which O Tar assumes to be the result of an ambition upon my part to occupy the throne of Manator. And now I am firmly convinced he has seized upon my criticism of his treatment of the slave girl Tara as a pretext for ridding himself of me." "But if you could escape and reach Gathol?" suggested Turan. "I have thought of that," mused Acor, "but how much better off would I be? In the eyes of the Gatholians I would be not a Gatholian, but a stranger, and doubtless they would accord me the same treatment that we of Manator accord strangers." "Could you convince them that you are the son of the Princess Dejah your welcome would be assured," said Turan, "while on the other hand you could purchase your freedom and citizenship with a brief period of labor in the diamond mines." "How know you all these things?" asked Acor. "I thought you were from Helium." "I am a panthan," replied Turan, "and I have served many countries, among them Gathol." "It is what the slaves from Gathol have told me," said Acor thoughtfully, "and my mother before O Tar sent her to live at Manatos. I think he must have feared her power and influence among the slaves from Gathol and their descendants, who number perhaps 1,000,000 people throughout the land of Manator." "Are these slaves organized?" asked Turan. Acor looked straight into the eyes of the panthan for a long moment before he replied. "You are a man of honor," he said. "I read it in your face, and I am seldom mistaken in my estimate of a man, but," and he leaned closer to the other, "even the walls have ears," he whispered, and Turan's question was answered. It was later in the evening that warriors came and unlocked the fetter from Turan's ankle and led him away to appear before O Tar the Jeddak. They conducted him toward the palace along narrow, winding streets and broad avenues, but always from the balconies there looked down upon them in endless ranks the silent people of the city. The palace itself was filled with life and activity. Mounted warriors galloped through the corridors, and up and down the runways connecting adjacent floors. It seemed that no one walked within the palace other than a few slaves. Squealing, fighting thoats were stabled in magnificent halls while their riders, if not upon some duty of the palace, played at jetan with small figures carved from wood. Turan noted the magnificence of the interior architecture of the palace, the lavish expenditure of precious jewels and metals, the gorgeous mural decorations which depicted almost exclusively martial scenes, and principally duels which seemed to be fought upon jetan boards of heroic size. The capitals of many of the columns supporting the ceilings of the corridors and chambers through which they passed were wrought into formal likenesses of jetan pieces. Everywhere there seemed to be a suggestion of the game. Along the same path that Tara of Helium had been led, Turan was conducted toward the throne room of O Tar the Jeddak, and when he entered the Hall of Chiefs his interest turned to wonder and admiration as he viewed the ranks of statuesque thoatmen, decked in their gorgeous martial panoply. Never, he thought, had he seen upon Barsoom more soldierly figures or thoats so perfectly trained to perfection of immobility as these. Not a muscle quivered, not a tail lashed, and the riders were as motionless as their mounts, each warlike eye straight to the front, the great spears inclined at the same angle. It was a picture to fill the breast of a fighting man with awe and reverence. Nor did it fail in its effect upon Turan as they conducted him the length of the chamber, where he waited before great doors until he should be summoned into the presence of the ruler of Manator. When Tara of Helium was ushered into the throne room of O Tar, she found the great hall filled with the chiefs and officers of O Tar and U Thor, the latter occupying the place of honor at the foot of the throne as was his due. The girl was conducted to the foot of the aisle and halted before the Jeddak, who looked down upon her from his high throne with scowling brows and fierce, cruel eyes. "The laws of Manator are just," said O Tar, addressing her. "Thus is it that you have been summoned here again to be judged by the highest authority of Manator. Word has reached me that you are suspected of being a Corphal. What word have you to say in refutation of the charge?" Tara of Helium could scarce restrain a sneer as she answered the ridiculous accusation of witchcraft. "So ancient is the culture of my people," she said, "that authentic history reveals no defense of that which we know existed only in the ignorant and superstitious minds of the most primitive peoples of the past. To those who are yet so untutored as to believe in the existence of Corphals, there can be no argument that will convince them of their error. Only long ages of refinement and culture can accomplish their release from the bondage of ignorance. I have spoken." "Yet you do not deny the accusation?" said O Tar. "It is not worthy the dignity of a denial," she responded haughtily. "And I were you, woman," said a deep voice at her side, "I should nevertheless deny it." Tara of Helium turned to see the eyes of U Thor, the great Jed of Manatos, upon her. Brave eyes they were, but neither cold nor cruel. O Tar rapped impatiently upon the arm of his throne. "U Thor forgets," he cried, "that O Tar is a Jeddak." "U Thor remembers," replied the Jed of Manatos, "that the laws of Manator permit any who may be accused to have advice and counsel before their judge." Tara of Helium saw that for some reason this man would have assisted her, and so she acted upon his advice. "I deny the charge," she said. "I am no Corphal." "Of that we shall learn," snapped O Tar. "Udor, where are those who have knowledge of the powers of this woman?" And Udor brought several who recounted the little that was known of the disappearance of E Med, and others who told of the creature of Ghek and Tara, suggesting by deduction that having been found together they had sufficient in common to make it reasonably certain that one was as bad as the other, and that therefore it remained but to convict one of them of Corphilism to make certain the guilt of both. And then O Tar called for Ghek, and immediately the hideous kaldane was dragged before him by warriors who could not conceal the fear in which they held this creature. "And you," said O Tar in cold, accusing tones, "already have I been told enough of you to warrant me in passing through your heart the jeddak steel, and of how you stole the brains from the warrior Uvan, so that he thought he saw your headless body still endowed with life, of how you caused another to believe that you had escaped, making him to see naught but an empty bench and a blank wall where you had been." "Ah, O Tar, but that is as nothing," cried a young padwar who had come in command of the escort that brought Ghek. "The thing which he did to I Zav would prove his guilt alone." "What did he to the warrior I Zav?" demanded O Tar. "Let I Zav speak." The warrior I Zav, a great fellow of bulging muscles and thick neck, advanced to the foot of the throne. He was pale, and still trembling visibly as from a nervous shock. "Let my first ancestor be my witness, O Tar, that I speak the truth," he began. "I was left to guard this creature, who sat upon a bench, shackled to the wall. I stood by the open doorway at the opposite end of the chamber. He could not reach me, yet, O Tar, may Iss engulf me if he did not drag me to him helpless as an unhatched egg. He dragged me to him, greatest of jeddaks, with his eyes. With his eyes he seized upon my eyes and dragged me to him, and he made me lay my swords and dagger upon the table and back off into a corner, and still keeping his eyes upon my eyes, his head quitted his body, and crawling upon 6 short legs it descended to the floor and backed part way into the hole of an ulsio, but not so far that the eyes were not still upon me, and then it returned with the key to its fetter, and after resuming its place upon its shoulders it unlocked the fetter and again dragged me across the room and made me to sit upon the bench where it had been, and there it fastened the fetter about my ankle, and I could do naught, for the power of its eyes and the fact that it wore my 2 swords and my dagger. And then the head disappeared down the hole of the ulsio with the key, and when it returned it resumed its body and stood guard over me at the doorway until the padwar came to fetch it hither." "It is enough," said O Tar sternly. "Both shall receive the jeddak steel," and rising from his throne he drew his long sword and descended the marble steps toward them, while 2 brawny warriors seized Tara by either arm and 2 seized Ghek, holding them facing the naked blade of the jeddak. "Hold, just O Tar," cried U Dor. "There be yet another to be judged. Let us confront him who calls himself Turan with these his fellows before they die." "Good!" exclaimed O Tar, pausing halfway down the stairs. "Fetch Turan, the slave." When Turan had been brought into the chamber he was placed a little to Tara's left and a step nearer the throne. O Tar eyed him menacingly. "You are Turan," he asked, "friend and companion of these?" The panthan was about to reply when Tara of Helium spoke. "I know not this fellow," she said. "Who dares say that he be a friend and companion of the Princess Tara of Helium?" Turan and Ghek looked at her in surprise, but at Turan she did not look, and to Ghek she passed a quick glance of warning, as to say, "Hold thy peace." The panthan tried not to fathom her purpose, for the head is useless when the heart usurps its functions, and Turan knew only that the woman he loved had denied him, and though he tried not even to think it is his foolish heart urged but a single explanation, that she refused to recognize him lest she be involved in his difficulties. O Tar looked first at one and then at another of them, but none of them spoke. "Were they not captured together?" he asked of U Dor. "No," replied the dwar. "He who is called Turan was found seeking entrance to the city and was enticed to the pits. The following morning I discovered the other 2 upon the hill beyond the Gate of Enemies." "But they are friends and companions," said a young padwar, "for this Turan inquired of me concerning these 2, calling them by name and saying that they were his friends." "It is enough," stated O Tar, "that all 3 shall die," and he took another step downward from the throne. "Or what shall we die?" asked Ghek. "Your people prate of the just laws of Manator, and yet you would slay 3 strangers without telling them of what crime they are accused." "He is right," said a deep voice. It was the voice of U Thor, the great Jed of Manatos. O Tar looked at him and scowled, but there came voices from other portions of the chamber, seconding the demand for justice. "Then know, thou you shall die anyway," cried O Tar, "that all 3 are convicted of Corphalism, and that as only a jeddak may slay such as you in safety, you are about to be honored with the steel of O Tar." "Fool!" cried Turan. "Know you not that in the veins of this woman flows the blood of 10,000 jeddaks, that greater than yours is her power in her own land? She is Tara, Princess of Helium, great granddaughter of Tardos Mors, daughter of John Carter, warlord of Barsoom. She cannot be a Corphal. Nor is this creature Ghek, nor am I, and you would know more. I can prove my right to be heard, and to be believed, if I may have word with the Princess Dejah of Gathol, whose son is my fellow prisoner in the pits of O Tar, his father." At this, U Thor rose to his feet and faced O Tar. "What means this?" he asked. "Speaks the man the truth? Is the son of Dejah a prisoner in thy pits, O Tar?" "And what is it to the Jed of Manatos, who be the prisoners in the pits of his jeddak?" demanded O Tar angrily. "It is this to the Jed of Manatos," replied U Thor in a voice so low as to be scarce more than a whisper, and yet that was heard the whole length and breadth of the great throne room of O Tar, Jeddak of Manator. "You gave me a slave woman, Dejah, who had been a princess in Gathol, because you feared her influence among the slaves from Gathol. I have made of her a free woman, and I have married her and made her thus a princess of Manatos. Her son is my son, O Tar, and though thou be my jeddak, I say to you that for any harm that befalls A Kor, you shall answer to U Thor of Manatos." O Tar looked long at U Thor, but he made no reply. Then he turned again to Turan. "If one be a Corphal," he said, "then all of you be Corphals, and we know well from the things that this creature has done," he pointed at Ghek, "that he is a Corphal, for no mortal has such powers as he. And as you are all Corphals, you all must die." He took another step downward when Ghek spoke. "These 2 have no such powers as I," he said. "They are but ordinary, brainless things such as yourself. I have done all the things that your poor, ignorant warriors have told you, but all this only demonstrates that I am of a higher order than yourselves, as is indeed the fact. I am a kaldane, not a Corphal. There is nothing supernatural or mysterious about me, other than that to the ignorant all things which they cannot understand are mysterious. Easily might I have eluded your warriors and escaped your pits, but I remained in the hope that I might help these 2 foolish creatures who have not the brains to escape without help. They befriended me and saved my life. I owe them this debt. Do not slay them. They are harmless. Slay me if you will. I offer my life if it will appease your ignorant wrath. I cannot return to Bantoom, and so I might as well die, for there is no pleasure in intercourse with the feeble intellects that cumber the face of the world outside the valley of Bantoom." "Hideous egotist," said O Tar. "Prepare to die, and assume not to dictate to O Tar the Jeddak. He has passed sentence, and all 3 of you shall feel the Jeddak's naked steel. I have spoken." He took another step downward, and then a strange thing happened. He paused, his eyes fixed upon the eyes of Ghek. His sword slipped from nerveless fingers, and still he stood there, swaying forward and back. A Jed rose to rush to his side, but Ghek stopped him with a word. "Wait," he cried. "The life of your jeddak is in my hands. You believe me a Corphal, and so you believe too that only the sword of a jeddak may slay me. Therefore your blades are useless against me. Offer harm to any one of us, or seek to approach your jeddak until I have spoken, and he will sink lifeless to the marble. Release the two prisoners, and let them come to my side. I would speak to them privately. Quick! Do as I say. I would as lief as not slay O Tar. I but let him live that I may gain freedom for my friends. Obstruct me, and he dies." The guards fell back, releasing Tara and Turan, who came closer to Ghek's side. "Do as I tell you, and do it quickly," whispered the kaldane. "I cannot hold this fellow long, nor could I kill him thus. There are many minds working against mine, and presently mine will tire, and O Tar will be himself again. You must make the best of your opportunity while you may. Behind the arras that you see hanging in the rear of the throne above you is a secret opening. From it a corridor leads to the pits of the palace, where there are storerooms containing food and drink. Few people go there. From these pits lead others to all parts of the city. Follow one that runs due west, and it will bring you to the gate of the enemies. The rest will then lie with you. I can do no more. Hurry before my waning powers fail me. I am not as Luud, who was a king. He could have held this creature forever. Make haste! Go!" This is the end of The Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 14. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 15. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 15. The Old Man of the Pits. "I shall not desert you, Ghek," said Tara of Helium simply. "Go, go," whispered the kaldane. "You can do me no good. Go, or all I have done is for naught." Tara shook her head. "I cannot," she said. "They will slay her," said Ghek to Turan, and the panthan, torn between loyalty to this strange creature who had offered its life for him and love of the woman, hesitated but a moment. Then he swept Tara from her feet, and lifting her in his arms leaped up the steps that led to the throne of Manator. Behind the throne he parted the arras and found the secret opening. Into this he bore the girl, and down a long, narrow corridor and winding runways that led to lower levels until they came to the pits of the palace of O Tar. Here was a labyrinth of passages and chambers, presenting 1,000 hiding places. As Turan bore Tara up the steps toward the throne, a score of warriors rose as though to rush forward to intercept them. "Stay!" cried Ghek, "or your jeddak dies," and they halted in their tracks, waiting the will of this strange, uncanny creature. Presently Ghek took his eyes from the eyes of O Tar, and the jeddak shook himself as one who would be rid of a bad dream, and straightened up, half dazed still. "Look," said Ghek, then, "I have given your jeddak his life, nor have I harmed one of those whom I might easily have slain when they were in my power. No harm have I or my friends done in the city of Manator. Why then should you persecute us? Give us our lives. Give us our liberty." O Tar, now in command of his faculties, stooped and regained his sword. In the room was silence as all waited to hear the jeddak's answer. "Just are the laws of Manator," he said at last. "Perhaps, after all, there is truth in the words of the stranger. Return him then to the pits and pursue the others and capture them. Through the mercy of O Tar they shall be permitted to win their freedom upon the field of Jetan in the coming games." Still ashen was the face of the jeddak as Ghek was led away, and his appearance was that of a man who had been snatched from the brink of eternity into which he has gazed, not with the composure of great courage, but with fear. There were those in the throne room who knew that the execution of the 3 prisoners had been but delayed, and the responsibility placed upon the shoulders of others, and one of those who knew was Uthor, the great Jed of Manatos. His curling lip betokened his scorn of the jeddak who had chosen humiliation rather than death. He knew that O Tar had lost more of prestige in those few moments than he could regain in a lifetime, for the Martians are jealous of the courage of their chiefs. There can be no evasions of stern duty, no temporizing with honor. That there were others in the room who shared U Thor's belief was evidenced by their silence and the grim scowls. O Tar glanced quickly around. He must have sensed the hostility and guessed its cause, for he went suddenly angry, and as one who seeks by the vehemence of his words to establish the courage of his heart, he roared forth what could be considered as naught other than a challenge. "The will of O Tar, the jeddak, is the law of Manator," he cried, "and the laws of Manator are just. They cannot err. Udor, dispatch those who will search the palace, the pits, and the city, and return the fugitives to their cells. And now for you, Udor of Manatos. Think you with impunity to threaten your jeddak? To question his right to punish traitors and instigators of treason? What am I to think of your own loyalty, who takes to wife a woman I have banished from my court because of her intrigues against the authority of her jeddak and her master? But O Tar is just. Make your explanations and your peace, then, before it is too late." "Uthor has nothing to explain," replied the Jed of Manatos, "nor is he at war with his jeddak, but he has the right that every Jed and every warrior enjoys, of demanding justice at the hands of the jeddak for whomsoever he believes to be persecuted. With increasing rigor has the jeddak of Manator persecuted the slaves from Gathol since he took to himself the unwilling Princess Dejah. If the slaves from Gathol have harbored thoughts of vengeance and escape, 'tis no more than might be expected from a proud and courageous people. Ever have I counseled greater fairness in our treatment of our slaves, many of whom, in their own lands, are people of great distinction and power, but always has O Tar, the jeddak, flouted with arrogance my every suggestion. Though it has been through none of my seeking that the question has arisen now, I am glad that it has, for the time was bound to come when the Jeds of Manator would demand from O Tar the respect and consideration that is their due from the man who holds his high office at their pleasure. Know then, O Tar, that you must free A Kor the dwar, forthwith, or bring him to fair trial before the assembled Jeds of Manator. I have spoken." "You have spoken well and to the point, U Thor," cried O Tar, "for you have revealed to your jeddak and your fellow Jeds the depth of the disloyalty that I have long suspected. A Kor already has been tried and sentenced by the Supreme Tribunal of Manator, O Tar the jeddak, and you too shall receive justice from the same unfailing source. In the meantime you are under arrest. To the pits with him! To the pits with U Thor, the false Jed!" He clapped his hands to summon the surrounding warriors to do his bidding. A score leaped forward to seize U Thor. They were warriors of the palace, mostly, but 20 leaped to defend U Thor, and with ringing steel they fought at the foot of the steps to the throne of Manator where stood O Tar, the jeddak, with drawn sword ready to take his part in the melee. At the clash of steel, palace guards rushed to the scene from other parts of the great building, until those who would have defended U Thor were outnumbered 2 to 1, and then the Jed of Manatos slowly withdrew with his forces, and fighting his way through the corridors and chambers of the palace came at last to the avenue. Here he was reinforced by the little army that had marched with him into Manator. Slowly they retreated toward the gate of enemies between the rows of silent people looking down upon them from the balconies, and there, within the city walls, they made their stand. In a dimly lighted chamber beneath the palace of O Tar, the jeddak, Turan the Panthan, lowered Tara of Helium from his arms and faced her. "I am sorry, Princess," he said, "that I was forced to disobey your commands, or to abandon Ghek, but there was no other way. Could he have saved you I would have stayed in his place. Tell me that you forgive me." "How could I do less?" she replied graciously, but it seemed cowardly to abandon a friend. "Had we been 3 fighting men it had been different," he said. "We could only have remained and died together, fighting. But you know, Tara of Helium, that we may not jeopardize a woman's safety even though we risk the loss of honor." "I know that, Turan," she said; "but no one may say that you have risked honor who knows the honor and bravery that are yours." He heard her with surprise, for these were the first words that she had spoken to him that did not savor of the attitude of a princess to a panthan, though it was more in her tone than the actual words that he apprehended the difference. How at variance were they to her recent repudiation of him? He could not fathom her, and so he blurted out the question that had been in his mind since he had told O Tar that she did not know him. "Tara of Helium," he said, "your words are balm to the wound you gave me in the throne room of O Tar. Tell me, Princess, why you denied me." She turned her great, deep eyes up to his and in them was a little of reproach. "You did not guess," she asked, "that it was my lips alone and not my heart that denied you? O Tar had ordered that I die, more because I was a companion of Ghek than because of any evidence against me, and so I knew that if I acknowledged you as one of us you would be slain too." "It was to save me, then?" he cried, his face suddenly lighting. "It was to save my brave panthan," she said in a low voice. "Tara of Helium," said the warrior, dropping to one knee, "your words are as food to my hungry heart," and he took her fingers in his and pressed them to his lips. Gently she raised him to his feet. "You need not tell me, kneeling," she said softly. Her hand was still in his as he rose, and they were very close, and the man was still flushed with the contact of her body since he had carried her from the throne room of O Tar. He felt his heart pounding in his breast and the hot blood surging through his veins as he looked at her beautiful face, with its downcast eyes and the half parted lips that he would have given a kingdom to possess. And then he swept her to him, and as he crushed her against his breast his lips smothered hers with kisses. But only for an instant. Like a tigress the girl turned upon him, striking him and thrusting him away. She stepped back, her head high and her eyes flashing fire. "You would dare?" she cried. "You would dare thus defile a princess of Helium?" His eyes met hers squarely, and there was no shame and no remorse in them. "Yes, I would dare," he said. "I would dare love Tara of Helium, but I would not dare defile her or any woman with kisses that were not prompted by love of her alone." He stepped closer to her and laid his hands upon her shoulders. "Look into my eyes, daughter of the Warlord," he said, "and tell me that you do not wish the love of Turan the panthan." "I do not wish your love," she cried, pulling away. "I hate you," and then turning away she bent her head into the hollow of her arm and wept. The man took a step toward her as though to comfort her when he was arrested by the sound of a crackling laugh behind him. Wheeling about he discovered a strange figure of a man standing in a doorway. It was one of those rarities occasionally to be seen upon Barsoom, an old man with the signs of age upon him. Bent and wrinkled, he had more the appearance of a mummy than a man. "Love in the pits of O Tar!" he cried, and again his thin laughter jarred upon the silence of the subterranean vaults. "A strange place to woo! A strange place to woo, indeed! When I was a young man we roamed in the gardens beneath giant pimeles and stole our kisses in the brief shadows of hurtling Thuria. We came not to the gloomy pits to speak of love, but times have changed and ways have changed, though I had never thought to live to see the time when the way of a man with a maid, or a maid with a man, would change. Ah, but we kissed them then, and what if they objected, eh? What if they objected? Why, we kissed them more, Those were the days," and he crackled again. Well do I recall the first of them I ever kissed, and I've kissed an army of them since. She was a fine girl, but she tried to slip a dagger into me while I was kissing her. Those were the days, but I kissed her. She's been dead over 1,000 years now, but she was never kissed again like that while she lived, I'll swear, not since she's been dead either. And then there was the other, but Turan, seeing 1,000 or more years of osculatory memoirs portending, interrupted. "Tell me, ancient one, not of thy loves, but of thyself. Who are you? What do you do here in the pits of O Tar?" "I might ask you the same, young man," replied the other. "Few there are who visit the pits other than the dead, except my pupils, That is it, you are new pupils. Good. But never before have they sent a woman to learn the great art from the greatest artist. But times have changed. Now in my day the women did no work. They were just for kissing and loving. Those were the women. I mind the one we captured in the south, She was a devil, but how she could love! She had breasts of marble and a heart of fire. Why she—" Yes, interrupted Turan. "We are pupils, and we are anxious to get to work. Lead on, and we will follow." Yes, come. All is rush and hurry as though there were not another countless myriad of ages ahead. Yes, as many as lie behind. 2,000 years have passed since I broke my shell, and always rush. Yet I cannot see that aught has been accomplished. Manator is the same today as it was then, except the girls. We had the girls then. There was one that I gained upon the fields of Jetan. But you should have seen—" "Lead on!" cried Turan. "After we are at work you shall tell us of her." Yes," said the old fellow, and shuffled off down a dimly lighted passage. "Follow me." "You are going with him?" asked Tara. "Why not?" replied Turan. "We know not where we are, or the way from these pits, for I know not east from west, but he doubtless knows, and if we are shrewd we may learn from him that which we would know. At least we cannot afford to arouse his suspicions." And so they followed him. Followed along winding corridors and through many chambers, until they came at last to a room in which there were several marble slabs raised upon pedestals some 3 feet above the floor, and upon each slab lay a human corpse. "Here we are!" exclaimed the old man. "These are fresh, and we shall have to get to work upon them soon. I am working now on one for the Gate of Enemies. He slew many of our warriors. Truly is he entitled to a place in the gate. Come, you shall see him." He led them to an adjoining apartment. Upon the floor were many fresh human bones, and upon a marble slab a mass of shapeless flesh. "You will learn this later," announced the old man, "but it will not harm you to watch me now, for there are not many thus prepared, and it may be long before you have the opportunity to see another prepared for the Gate of Enemies. First, you see, I remove all the bones, carefully, that the skin may be damaged as little as possible. The skull is the most difficult, but it can be removed by a skillful artist. You see, I have made but a single opening. This I now sew up, and that done, the body is hung so," and he fastened a piece of rope to the hair of the corpse, and swung the horrid thing to a ring in the ceiling. Directly below it was a circular manhole in the floor, from which he removed the cover, revealing a well partially filled with a reddish liquid. "Now we lower it into this, the formula for which you shall learn in due time. We fasten it thus to the bottom of the cover, which we now replace. In a year it will be ready, but it must be examined often in the meantime, and the liquid kept above the level of its crown. It will be a very beautiful piece, this one, when it is ready. And you are fortunate again, for there is one to come out today." He crossed to the opposite side of the room and raised another cover, reached in, and dragged a grotesque looking figure from the hole. It was a human body, shrunk by the action of the chemical in which it had been immersed, to a little figure scarce a foot high. "Is it not fine?" cried the little old man. Tomorrow it will take its place in the Gate of Enemies." He dried it off with cloths and packed it away carefully in a basket. "Perhaps you would like to see some of my life work," he suggested, and without waiting for their assent led them to another apartment, a large chamber in which were 40 or 50 people. All were sitting or standing quietly about the walls, with the exception of one huge warrior who bestrode a great thoat in the very center of the room, and all were motionless. Instantly there sprang to the minds of Tara and Turan the rows of silent people upon the balconies that lined the avenues of the city, and the noble array of mounted warriors in the Hall of Chiefs, and the same explanation came to both, but neither dared voice the question that was in his mind, for fear of revealing by his ignorance the fact that they were strangers in Manator, and therefore impostors in the guise of pupils. "It is very wonderful," said Turan. "It must require great skill and patience and time." "That it does," replied the old man, "though having done it so long I am quicker than most, but mine are the most natural. Why, I would defy the wife of that warrior to say that in so far as appearances are concerned he does not live," and he pointed at the man upon the thoat. "Many of them, of course, are brought here wasted or badly wounded, and these I have to repair. That is where great skill is required, for every one wants his dead to look as they did at their best in life. But you shall learn to mount them and paint them and repair them, and sometimes to make an ugly one look beautiful, and it will be a great comfort to be able to mount your own. Why, for 1500 years no one has mounted my own dead but myself. I have many. My balconies are crowded with them, but I keep a great room for my wives. I have them all, as far back as the first one, and many is the evening I spend with them, quiet evenings and very pleasant. And then the pleasure of preparing them and making them even more beautiful than in life partially recompenses one for their loss. I take my time with them, looking for a new one while I am working on the old. When I am not sure about a new one I bring her to the chamber where my wives are and compare her charms with theirs, and there is always a great satisfaction at such times in knowing that they will not object. I love harmony." "Did you prepare all the warriors in the Hall of Chiefs?" asked Turan. "Yes, I prepare them and repair them," replied the old man. "O Tar will trust no other. Even now I have 2 in another room who were damaged in some way and brought down to me. O Tar does not like to have them gone long, since it leaves 2 riderless thoats in the hall, but I shall have them ready presently. He wants them all there in the event any momentous question arises upon which the living Jeds cannot agree, or do not agree with O Tar. Such questions he carries to the Jeds in the Hall of Chiefs. Then he shuts himself up alone with the great chiefs who have attained wisdom through death. It is an excellent plan, and there is never any friction or misunderstandings. O Tar has said that it is the finest deliberative body upon Barsoom, much more intelligent than that composed of the living Jeds. But come, we must get to work. Come into the next chamber, and I will begin your instruction." He led the way into the chamber, in which lay the several corpses upon their marble slabs, and going to a cabinet he donned a pair of huge spectacles and commenced to select various tools from little compartments. This done, he turned again toward his 2 pupils. "Now let me have a look at you," he said. "My eyes are not what they once were, and I need these powerful lenses for my work, or to see distinctly the features of those around me." He turned his eyes upon the 2 before him. Turan held his breath, for he knew that now the man must discover that they wore not the harness or insignia of Manator. He had wondered before why the old fellow had not noticed it, for he had not known that he was half blind. The other examined their faces, his eyes lingering long upon the beauty of Tara of Helium, and then they drifted to the harness of the 2. Turan thought that he noted an appreciable start of surprise on the part of the taxidermist, but if the old man noticed anything, his next words did not reveal it. "Come with I Gos," he said to Turan. I have materials in the next room that I would have you fetch hither. Remain here, woman, we shall be gone but a moment." He led the way to one of the numerous doors opening into the chamber and entered ahead of Turan. Just inside the door he stopped, and pointing to a bundle of silks and furs upon the opposite side of the room, directed Turan to fetch them. The latter had crossed the room and was stooping to raise the bundle when he heard the click of a lock behind him. Wheeling instantly, he saw that he was alone in the room and that the single door was closed. Running rapidly to it, he strove to open it, only to find that he was a prisoner. I Gos, stepping out and locking the door behind him, turned toward Tara. "Your leather betrayed you," he said, laughing his crackling laugh. "You sought to deceive old I Gos, but you found that though his eyes are weak his brain is not. But it shall not go ill with you. You are beautiful, and I Gos loves beautiful women. I might not have you elsewhere in Manator, but here there is none to deny old I Gos. Few come to the pits of the dead, only those who bang the dead, and they hasten away as fast as they can. No one will know that I Gos has a beautiful woman locked with his dead. I shall ask you no questions, and then I will not have to give you up, for I will not know to whom you belong, eh? And when you die I shall mount you beautifully and place you in the chamber with my other women. Will that not be fine, eh?" He had approached until he stood close beside the horrified girl. "Come," he cried, seizing her by the wrist. "Come to I Gos." This is the end of the Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 15. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 16. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars, by Edgar Rice Burroughs, Chapter 16. Another Change of Name. Turan dashed himself against the door of his prison in a vain effort to break through the solid skeel to the side of Tara, whom he knew to be in grave danger, but the heavy panels held and he succeeded only in bruising his shoulders and arms. At last he desisted and set about searching his prison for some other means of escape. He found no other opening in the stone walls, but his search revealed a heterogeneous collection of odds and ends of arms and apparel, of harness and ornaments and insignia, and sleeping silks and furs in great quantities. There were swords and spears, and several large two-bladed battle axes, the heads of which bore a striking resemblance to the propeller of a small flier. Seizing one of these, he attacked the door once more with great fury. He expected to hear something from I Gos at this ruthless destruction, but no sound came to him from beyond the door, which was, he thought, too thick for the human voice to penetrate, but he would have wagered much that I Gos heard him. Bits of the hard wood splintered at each impact of the heavy axe, but it was slow work and heavy. Presently he was compelled to rest, and so it went for what seemed hours, working almost to the verge of exhaustion and then resting for a few minutes. But ever the hole grew larger, though he could see nothing of the interior of the room beyond, because of the hanging that I Gos had drawn across it after he had locked Turan within. At last, however, the panthan had hewn an opening through which his body could pass, and seizing a long sword that he had brought close to the door for the purpose, he crawled through into the next room. Flinging aside the arras, he stood ready, sword in hand, to fight his way to the side of Tara of Helium, but she was not there. In the center of the room lay I Gos, dead upon the floor, but Tara of Helium was nowhere to be seen. Turan was nonplussed. It must have been her hand that had struck down the old man, yet she made no effort to release Turan from his prison. And then he thought of those last words of hers: "I do not want your love. I hate you." And the truth dawned upon him. She had seized upon this first opportunity to escape him. With downcast heart, Turan turned away. What should he do? There could be but one answer. While he lived, and she lived, he must still leave no stone unturned to effect her escape and safe return to the land of her people. But how? How was he even to find his way from this labyrinth? How was he to find her again? He walked to the nearest doorway. It chanced to be that which led into the room containing the mounted dead, awaiting transportation to balcony or grim room or whatever place was to receive them. His eyes traveled to the great painted warrior on the thoat, and as they ran over the splendid trappings and the serviceable arms a new light came into the pain-dulled eyes of the panthan. With a quick step he crossed to the side of the dead warrior and dragged him from his mount. With equal celerity he stripped him of his harness and his arms, and tearing off his own, donned the regalia of the dead man. Then he hastened back to the room in which he had been trapped, for there he had seen that which he needed to make his disguise complete. In a cabinet he found them, pots of paint that the old taxidermist had used to place the war paint in its wide bands across the cold faces of dead warriors. A few moments later Gahan of Gathol emerged from the room, a warrior of Manator in every detail of harness, equipment, and ornamentation. He had removed from the leather of the dead man the insignia of his house and rank, so that he might pass, with the least danger of arousing suspicion, as a common warrior. To search for Tara of Helium in the vast, dim labyrinth of the pits of O Tar seemed to the Gatholian a hopeless quest, foredoomed to failure. It would be wiser to seek the streets of Manator, where he might hope to learn first if she had been recaptured, and, if not, then he could return to the pits and pursue the hunt for her. To find egress from the maze he must perforce travel a considerable distance through the winding corridors and chambers, since he had no idea as to the location or direction of any exit. In fact, he could not have retraced his steps 100 yards toward the point at which he and Tara had entered the gloomy caverns, and so he set out in the hope that he might find by accident either Tara of Helium or a way to the street level above. For a time he passed room after room, filled with the cunningly preserved dead of Manator, many of which were piled in tiers after the manner that firewood is corded, and as he moved through corridor and chamber he noticed hieroglyphics painted upon the walls above every opening and at each fork or crossing of corridors, until by observation he reached the conclusion that these indicated the designations of passageways, so that one who understood them might travel quickly and surely through the pits. But Turan did not understand them. Even could he have read the language of Manator, they might not materially have aided one unfamiliar with the city, but he could not read them at all, since, though there is but one spoken language upon Barsoom, there are as many different written languages as there are nations. One thing, however, soon became apparent to him: the hieroglyphic of a corridor remained the same until the corridor ended. It was not long before Turan realized from the distance that he had traveled that the pits were part of a vast system undermining, possibly, the entire city. At least he was convinced that he had passed beyond the precincts of the palace. The corridors and chambers varied in appearance and architecture from time to time. All were lighted, though usually quite dimly, with radium bulbs. For a long time he saw no signs of life other than an occasional ulsio. Then, quite suddenly, he came face to face with a warrior at one of the numerous crossings. The fellow looked at him, nodded, and passed on. Turan breathed a sigh of relief. as he realized that his disguise was effective, but he was caught in the middle of it by a hail from the warrior who had stopped and turned toward him. The panthan was glad that a sword hung at his side, and glad, too, that they were buried in the dim recesses of the pits, and that there would be but a single antagonist, for time was precious. "Heard you any word of the other?" called the warrior to him. "No," replied Turan, who had not the faintest idea to whom or what the fellow referred. "He cannot escape," continued the warrior. "The woman ran directly into our arms, but she swore that she knew not where her companion might be found." "They took her back to O Tar?" asked Turan, for now he knew whom the other meant, and he would know more. "They took her back to the towers of Jetan," replied the warrior. "Tomorrow the games commence, and doubtless she will be played for, though I doubt if any wants her, beautiful as she is. She fears not even O Tar, by Cluros, but she would make a hard slave to subdue. A regular she banth she is, not for me," and he continued on his way, shaking his head. Turan hurried on, searching for an avenue that led to the level of the streets above, when suddenly he came to the open doorway of a small chamber, in which sat a man who was chained to the wall. Turan voiced a low exclamation of surprise and pleasure as he recognized that the man was A Kor, and that he had stumbled by accident upon the very cell in which he had been imprisoned. A Kor looked at him questioningly. It was evident that he did not recognize his fellow prisoner. Turan crossed the table and leaning close to the other whispered to him. "I am Turan the panthan," he said, "who was chained beside you." A Kor looked at him closely. "Your own mother would never know you," he said. "But tell me, what has transpired since they took you away?" Turan recounted his experiences in the throne room of O Tar and in the pits beneath. "And now," he continued, "I must find these towers of Jetan and see what may be done toward liberating the Princess of Helium." A Kor shook his head. "Long was I dwar of the towers," he said, "and I can say to you, stranger, that you might as well attempt to reduce Manator single handed as to rescue a prisoner from the towers of Jetan." "But I must," replied Turan. "Are you better than a good swordsman?" asked A Kor presently. "I am accounted so," replied Turan. "Then there is a way. Sst!" and he was suddenly silent and pointing toward the base of the wall at the end of the room. Turan looked in the direction the other's forefinger indicated to see projecting from the mouth of an ulsio's burrow two large chelae and a pair of protruding eyes. "Ghek!" he cried, and immediately the hideous kaldane crawled out upon the floor and approached the table. A Kor drew back with a half stifled ejaculation of repulsion. "Do not fear," Turan reassured him. "It is my friend, he whom I told you held O Tar while Tara and I escaped." Ghek climbed to the table top and squatted between the two warriors. "You are safe in assuming," he said addressing A Kor, "that Turan the panthan has no master in all Manator where the art of swordplay is concerned. I overheard your conversation. Go on." "You are his friend," continued A Kor, "and so I may explain safely in your presence the only plan I know whereby he may hope to rescue the Princess of Helium. She is to be the stake of one of the games, and it is O Tar's desire that she be won by slaves and common warriors, since she repulsed him. Thus would he punish her. Not a single man, but all who survive upon the winning side are to possess her. With money, however, one may buy off the others before the game. That you could do, and if your side won and you survived, she would become your slave." "But how may a stranger and a hunted fugitive accomplish this?" asked Turan. "No one will recognize you. You will go tomorrow to the keeper of the towers and enlist in that game for which the girl is to be the stake, telling the keeper that you are from Manataj, the farthest city of Manator. If he questions you, you may say that you saw her when she was brought into the city after her capture. If you win her, You will find thoats stabled at my palace, and you will carry from me a token that will place all that is mine at your disposal." "But how can I buy off the others in the game without money?" asked Turan. "I have none, not even of my own country." A Kor opened his pocket pouch and drew forth a packet of Manatorian money. "Here is sufficient to buy them off twice over," he said, handing a portion of it to Turan. "But why do you do this for a stranger?" asked the panthan. "My mother was a captive princess here," replied A Kor. "I but do for the Princess of Helium what my mother would have me do." "Under the circumstances, then, Manatorian," replied Turan, "I cannot but accept your generosity on behalf of Tara of Helium, and live in hope that some day I may do for you something in return." "Now you must be gone," advised A Kor. "At any minute a guard may come and discover you here. Go directly to the Avenue of the Gates, which circles the city just within the outer wall. There you will find many places devoted to the lodging of strangers. You will know them by the thoat's head carved above the doors. Say that you are here from Manataj to witness the games. Take the name of U Kal. It will arouse no suspicion, nor will you if you can avoid conversation. Early in the morning seek the keeper of the towers of Jetan. May the strength and fortune of all your ancestors be with you." Bidding good bye to Ghek and A Kor, the panthan, following directions given him by A Kor, set out to find his way to the Avenue of the Gates. Nor had he any great difficulty. On the way he met several warriors, but beyond a nod they gave him no heed. With ease he found a lodging place where there were many strangers from other cities of Manator. As he had had no sleep since the previous night, he threw himself among the silks and furs of his couch to gain the rest which he must have was he to give the best possible account of himself in the service of Tara of Helium the following day. It was already morning when he awoke, and rising he paid for his lodgings, sought a place to eat, and a short time later was on his way toward the towers of Jetan, which he had no difficulty in finding, owing to the great crowds that were winding along the avenues toward the games. The new keeper of the towers who had succeeded E-Med was too busy to scrutinize entries closely, for in addition to the many volunteer players there were scores of slaves and prisoners being forced into the games by their owners or the government. The name of each must be recorded, as well as the position he was to play and the game or games in which he was to be entered. And then there were the substitutes for each that was entered in more than a single game, one for each additional game that an individual was entered for, that no succeeding game might be delayed by the death or disablement of a player. "Your name?" asked the clerk as Turan presented himself. "U Kal," replied the panthan. "Your city?" "Manataj." The keeper, who was standing beside the clerk, looked at Turan. "You have come a great way to play at Jetan," he said. "It is seldom that the men of Manataj attend other than the decennial games. Tell me of Ozar. Will he attend next year? Ah, but he was a noble fighter. If you be half the swordsman U Kal, the fame of Manataj will increase this day. But tell me, what of Ozar?" "He is well," replied Turan glibly, "and he sent greetings to his friends in Manator." "Good!" exclaimed the keeper. "And now in what game would you enter?" "I would play for the Helumetic Princess, Tara," replied Turan. "But man, she is to be the stake of a game for slaves and criminals," cried the keeper. "You would not volunteer for such a game." "But I would," replied Turan. "I saw her when she was brought into the city, and even then I vowed to possess her." "But you will have to share her with the survivors even if your color wins," objected the other. "They may be brought to reason," insisted Turan. "And you will chance incurring the wrath of O Tar, who has no love for this savage barbarian," explained the keeper. "And I win her O Tar will be rid of her," said Turan. The Keeper of the Towers of Jetan shook his head. "You are rash," he said. "I would that I might dissuade the friend of my friend Ozar from such madness." "Would you favor the friend of Ozar?" asked Turan. "Gladly," exclaimed the other. "What may I do for him?" "Make me chief of the Black, and give me for my pieces all slaves from Gathol, for I understand that those be excellent warriors," replied the panthan. "It is a strange request," said the keeper, "but for my friend Ozar I would do even more, though of course," he hesitated, "it is customary for one who would be chief to make some slight payment." "Certainly," Turan hastened to assure him. "I had not forgotten that. I was about to ask you what the customary amount is." "For the friend of my friend it shall be nominal," replied the keeper, naming a figure that Gahan, accustomed to the high price of wealthy Gathol, thought ridiculously low. "Tell me," he said, handing the money to the keeper, "when the game for the Heliumite is to be played." "It is the second in order of the day's games, and now if you will come with me you may select your pieces." Turan followed the keeper to a large court which lay between the towers and the Jetan field, where hundreds of warriors were assembled. Already chiefs for the games of the day were selecting their pieces and assigning them to positions, though for the principal games these matters had been arranged for weeks before. The keeper led Turan to a part of the courtyard where the majority of the slaves were assembled. "Take your choice of those not assigned," said the keeper, "and when you have your quota conduct them to the field. Your place will be assigned you by an officer there, and there you will remain with your pieces until the second game is called. I wish you luck, U Kal, though from what I have heard you will be more lucky to lose than to win the slave from Helium." After the fellow had departed, Turan approached the slaves. "I seek the best swordsmen for the second game," he announced. "Men from Gathol I wish, for I have heard that these be noble fighters." A slave rose and approached him. "It is all the same in which game we die," he said. "I would fight for you as a panthan in the second game." Another came. "I am not from Gathol," he said. "I am from Helium, and I would fight for the honor of a princess of Helium." "Good!" exclaimed Turan. "Art a swordsman of repute in Helium?" "I was a dwar under the great Warlord, and I have fought at his side in a score of battles from the Golden Cliffs to the Carrion Caves. My name is Val Dor. Who knows Helium knows my prowess." The name was well known to Gahan, who had heard the man spoken of on his last visit to Helium, and his mysterious disappearance discussed, as well as his renown as a fighter. "How could I know aught of Helium?" asked Turan. "But if you be such a fighter as you say, no position could suit you better than that of Flier. What say you?" The man's eyes denoted sudden surprise. He looked keenly at Turan, his eyes running quickly over the other's harness. Then he stepped quite close, so that his words might not be overheard. "Methinks you may know more of Helium than of Manator," he whispered. "What mean you, fellow?" demanded Turan, seeking to cudgel his brains for the source of this man's knowledge, guess, or inspiration. "I mean," replied Val Dor, "that you are not of Manator, and that if you wish to hide the fact it is well that you speak not to a Manatorian as you did just speak to me of Fliers. There be no Fliers in Manator, and no piece in their game of Jetan bearing that name. Instead they call him who stands next to the chief or princess Odwar. The piece has the same moves and power that the Flier has in the game as played outside Manator. Remember this then, and remember too that if you have a secret it be safe in the keeping of Val Dor of Helium." Turan made no reply, but turned to the task of selecting the remainder of his pieces. Val Dor, the Heliumite, and Floran, the volunteer from Gathol, were of great assistance to him, since one or the other of them knew most of the slaves from whom his selection was to be made. The pieces all chosen, Turan led them to the place beside the playing field where they were to wait their turn, and here he passed the word around that they were to fight for more than the stake he offered for the princess should they win. This stake they accepted, so that Turan was sure of possessing Tara if his side was victorious, but he knew that these men would fight even more valorously for chivalry than for money, nor was it difficult to enlist the interest even of the Gatholians in the service of the princess. And now he held out the possibility of a still further reward. "I cannot promise you," he explained, "but I may say I have heard that this day which makes it possible that should we win this game we may even win your freedom." They leaped to their feet and crowded around him with many questions. "It may not be spoken of aloud," he said, "but Floran and Valdor know, and they assure me that you may all be trusted. Listen. What I would tell you places my life in your hands, but you must know that every man will realize that he is fighting today the greatest battle of his life, for the honor and the freedom of Barsoom's most wondrous princess, and for his own freedom as well, for the chance to return each to his own country and to the woman who awaits him there. First, then, is my secret. I am not of Manator. Like yourselves, I am a slave, though for the moment disguised as a Manatorian from Manataj. My country and my identity must remain undisclosed for reasons that have no bearing upon our game today. I, then, am one of you. I fight for the same things that you will fight for. And now for that which I have but just learned. Uthor, the great Jed of Manatos, quarreled with O Tar in the palace the day before yesterday, and their warriors set upon one another. Uthor was driven as far as the Gate of Enemies, where he now lies encamped. At any moment the fight may be renewed, but it is thought that Uthor has sent to Manatos for reinforcements. Now, men of Gathol, here is the thing that interests you. Uthor has recently taken to wife the Princess Dejah of Gathol, who is slave to O Tar, and whose son Akor was Dwar of the Towers of Jetan. Dejah's heart is filled with loyalty for Gathol, and compassion for her sons who are here enslaved, and this latter sentiment she has to some extent transmitted to Uthor. Aid me, therefore, in freeing the Princess Tara of Helium, and I believe that I can aid you and her and myself to escape the city. Bend close your ears, slaves of O Tar, that no cruel enemy may hear my words." And Gahan of Gathol whispered in low tones the daring plan he had conceived. "And now," he demanded, when he had finished, "let him who does not dare speak now." None replied. "Is there none?" "And it would not betray you should I cast my sword at thy feet. It had been done ere this," said one in low tones, pregnant with suppressed feelings. "And I, and I, and I," chorused the others in vibrant whispers. This is the end of the Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 16. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 17. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Chessmen of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 17. A Play to the Death. Clear and sweet a trumpet spoke across the fields of Jetan. From the high tower its cool voice floated across the city of Manator and above the babble of human discords rising from the crowded mass that filled the seats of the stadium below. It called the players for the first game, and simultaneously there fluttered to the peaks of 1,000 staffs on tower and battlement and the great wall of the stadium the rich, gay pennons of the fighting chiefs of Manator. Thus was marked the opening of the Jeddak's Games, the most important of the year, and second only to the grand decennial games. Gahan of Gathol watched every play with eagle eye. The match was an unimportant one, being but to settle some petty dispute between two chiefs, and was played with professional jetan players for points only. No one was killed, and there was but little blood spilled. It lasted about an hour, and was terminated by the chief of the losing side deliberately permitting himself to be outpointed that the game might be called a draw. Again the trumpet sounded, this time announcing the second and last game of the afternoon. While this was not considered an important match, those being reserved for the fourth and fifth days of the games, it promised to afford sufficient excitement, since it was a game to the death. The vital difference between the game played with living men and that in which inanimate pieces are used lies in the fact that while in the latter the mere placing of a piece upon a square occupied by an opponent piece terminates the move, in the former the two pieces thus brought together engage in a duel for possession of the square. Therefore there enters into the former game not only the strategy of jetan, but the personal prowess and bravery of each individual piece, so that a knowledge not only of one's own men but of each player upon the opposing side is of vast value to a chief. In this respect was Gahan handicapped, though the loyalty of his players did much to offset his ignorance of them, since they aided him in arranging the board to the best advantage and told him honestly the faults and virtues of each. One fought best in a losing game, another was too slow, another too impetuous. This one had fire and a heart of steel, but lacked endurance. Of the opponents, though, they knew little or nothing, and now as the two sides took their places upon the black and orange squares of the great jetan board Gahan obtained, for the first time, a close view of those who opposed him. The Orange Chief had not yet entered the field, but his men were all in place. Val Dor turned to Gahan. "They are all criminals from the pits of Manator," he said. "There is no slave among them. We shall not have to fight against a single fellow countryman, and every life we take will be the life of an enemy." "It is well," replied Gahan, "but where is their chief, and where the two princesses?" "They are coming now, see!" and he pointed across the field to where two women could be seen approaching under guard. As they came nearer, Gahan saw that one was indeed Tara of Helium, but the other he did not recognize, and then they were brought to the center of the field, midway between the two sides, and there waited until the Orange Chief arrived. Floran voiced an exclamation of surprise when he recognized him. "By my ancestor, if it is not one of their great chiefs," he said, "and we were told that slaves and criminals were to play for the stake of this game." His words were interrupted by the Keeper of the Towers, whose duty it was not only to announce the games and the stakes, but to act as referee as well. "Of this, the second game of the first day of the Jeddak's Games in the 433rd year of Otar, Jeddak of Manator, the princesses of each side shall be the sole stakes, and to the survivors of the winning side shall belong both the princesses, to do with as they shall see fit. The Orange Princess is the slave woman Lano of Gathol. The Black Princess is the slave woman Tara, a princess of Helium. The Black Chief is Ukal of Manataj, a volunteer player. The Orange Chief is the Dwar Udor of the 8th Utan of the Jeddak of Manator, also a volunteer player. The squares shall be contested to the death. Just are the laws of Manator. I have spoken." The initial move was won by Udor, following which the two chiefs escorted their respective princesses to the square each was to occupy. It was the first time Gahan had been alone with Tara, since she had been brought to the field. He saw her scrutinizing him closely as he approached to lead her to her place, and wondered if she recognized him, but if she did, she gave no sign of it. He could not but remember her last words, "I hate you," and her desertion of him when he had been locked in the room beneath the palace by I Gos, the taxidermist, and so he did not seek to enlighten her as to his identity. He meant to fight for her, to die for her if necessary, and if he did not die, to go on fighting to the end for her love. Gahan of Gathol was not easily to be discouraged, but he was compelled to admit that his chances of winning the love of Tara of Helium were remote. Already she had repulsed him twice, once as Jed of Gathol and again as Turan the Panthan. Before his love, however, came her safety, and the former must be relegated to the background until the latter had been achieved. Passing among the players already at their stations, the two took their places upon their respective squares. At Tara's left was the Black Chief, Gahan of Gathol. Directly in front of her the Princess Panthan, Floran of Gathol, and at her right the Princess Odwar, Valdor of Helium. And each of these knew the part that he was to play, win or lose, as did each of the other black players. As Tara took her place, Valdor bowed low. "My sword is at your feet, Tara of Helium," he said. She turned and looked at him, an expression of surprise and incredulity upon her face. "Valdor the Dwar!" she exclaimed. "Valdor of Helium, one of my father's trusted captains. Can it be possible that my eyes speak the truth?" "It is Valdor, Princess," the warrior replied, "and here to die for you if need be, as is every wearer of the black upon this field of Jetan today. Know, Princess," he whispered, "that upon this side is no man of Manator, but each and every is an enemy of Manator." She cast a quick meaning glance toward Gahan. "But what of him?" she whispered, and then she caught her breath quickly in surprise. "Shade of the first Jeddak!" she exclaimed. "I did but just recognize him through his disguise." "And you trust him?" asked Valdor. "I know him not, but he spoke fairly as an honorable warrior, and we have taken him at his word." "You have made no mistake," replied Tara of Helium. "I would trust him with my life, with my soul, and you too may trust him." Happy indeed would have been Gahan of Gathol could he have heard those words, but fate, who is usually unkind to the lover in such matters, ordained it otherwise, and then the game was on. U Dor moved his Princess Odwar 3 squares diagonally to the right, which placed the piece upon the Black Chief's Odwar's 7th. The move was indicative of the game that U Dor intended playing, a game of blood rather than of science, and evidenced his contempt for his opponents. Gahan followed with his Odwar's Panthan, 1 square straight forward, a more scientific move, which opened up an avenue for himself through his line of Panthans, as well as announcing to the players and spectators that he intended having a hand in the fighting himself, even before the exigencies of the game forced it upon him. The move elicited a ripple of applause from those sections of seats reserved for the common warriors and their women, showing perhaps that U Dor was none too popular with these, and, too, it had its effect upon the morale of Gahan's pieces. A chief may, and often does, play almost an entire game without leaving his own square, where, mounted upon a thoat, he may overlook the entire field and direct each move. Nor may he be reproached for lack of courage should he elect thus to play the game, since, by the rules, were he to be slain or so badly wounded as to be compelled to withdraw, a game that might otherwise have been won by the science of his play and the prowess of his men would be drawn. To invite personal combat, therefore, denotes confidence in his own swordsmanship and great courage, 2 attributes that were calculated to fill the black players with hope and valor when evinced by their chief thus early in the game. Udor's next move placed Lano's Odwar upon Tara's Odwar's fourth, within striking distance of the Black Princess. Another move and the game would be lost to Gahan unless the Orange Odwar was overthrown, or Tara moved to a position of safety. But to move his princess now would be to admit his belief in the superiority of the Orange. In the 3 squares allowed him, he could not place himself squarely upon the square occupied by the Odwar of Udor's princess. There was only one player upon the Black side that might dispute the square with the enemy, and that was the chief's Odwar, who stood upon Gahan's left. Gahan turned upon his thoat and looked at the man. He was a splendid looking fellow, resplendent in the gorgeous trappings of an Odwar, the 5 brilliant feathers which denoted his position rising defiantly erect from his thick black hair. In common with every player upon the field, and every spectator in the crowded stands, he knew what was passing in his chief's mind. He dare not speak, the ethics of the game forbade it, but what his lips might not voice, his eyes expressed in martial fire, and eloquently. The honor of the Black and the safety of our princess are secure with me. Gahan hesitated no longer. Chief's Odwar to Princess Odwar's fourth, he commanded. It was the courageous move of a leader who had taken up the gauntlet thrown down by his opponent. The warrior sprang forward and leaped into the square occupied by Udor's piece. It was the first disputed square of the game. The eyes of the players were fastened upon the contestants. The spectators leaned forward in their seats after the first applause that had greeted the move, and silence fell upon the vast assemblage. If the Black went down to defeat, Udor could move his victorious piece on to the square occupied by Tara of Helium, and the game would be over in 4 moves, and lost to Gahan of Gathol. If the Orange lost, Udor would have sacrificed one of his most important pieces, and more than lost what advantage the first move might have given him. Physically, the 2 men appeared perfectly matched, and each was fighting for his life, but from the first it was apparent that the Black Odwar was the better swordsman, and Gahan knew that he had another and perhaps a greater advantage over his antagonist. The latter was fighting for his life only, without the spur of chivalry or loyalty. The Black Odwar had these to strengthen his arm, and besides these, the knowledge of the thing that Gahan had whispered into the ears of his players before the game, and so he fought for what is more than life to the man of honor. It was a duel that held those who witnessed it in spellbound silence. The weaving blades gleamed in the brilliant sunlight, ringing to the parries of cut and thrust. The barbaric harness of the duelist lent splendid color to the savage, martial scene. The Orange Odwar, forced upon the defensive, was fighting madly for his life. The Black, with cool and terrible efficiency, was forcing him steadily, step by step, into a corner of the square, a position from which there could be no escape. To abandon the square was to lose it to his opponent and win for himself ignoble and immediate death before the jeering populace. Spurred on by the seeming hopelessness of his plight, the Orange Odwar burst into a sudden fury of offense that forced the Black back a half a dozen steps, and then the sword of Udor's piece leaped in and drew first blood from the shoulder of his merciless opponent. An ill-smothered cry of encouragement went up from Udor's men. The Orange Odwar, encouraged by his single success, sought to bear down the Black by the rapidity of his attack. There was a moment in which the swords moved with a rapidity that no man's eye might follow, and then the Black Odwar made a lightning parry of a vicious thrust, leaned quickly forward into the opening he had effected, and drove his sword through the heart of the Orange Odwar. To the hilt he drove it through the body of the Orange Odwar. A shout arose from the stands, for wherever may have been the favor of the spectators, none there was who could say that it had not been a pretty fight, or that the better man had not won, and from the Black players came a sigh of relief as they relaxed from the tension of the past moments. I shall not weary you with the details of the game. Only the high features of it are necessary to your understanding of the outcome. The fourth move after the victory of the Black Odwar found Gahan upon U Dor's fourth. An orange panthan was on the adjoining square diagonally to his right, and the only opposing piece that could engage him other than U Dor himself. It had been apparent to both players and spectators for the past two moves that Gahan was moving straight across the field into the enemy's country to seek personal combat with the Orange Chief, that he was staking all upon his belief in the superiority of his swordsmanship, since if the two chiefs engage, the outcome decides the game. U Dor could move out and engage Gahan, or he could move his Princess Panthan upon the square occupied by Gahan, in the hope that the former would defeat the Black Chief, and thus draw the game, which is the outcome if any other than a chief slays the opposing chief. Or he could move away and escape, temporarily, the necessity for personal combat, or at least that is evidently what he had in mind, as was obvious to all who saw him scanning the board about him, and his disappointment was apparent when he finally discovered that Gahan had so placed himself that there was no square to which U Dor could move, that it was not within Gahan's power to reach at his own next move. U Dor had placed his own princess 4 squares east of Gahan when her position had been threatened, and he had hoped to lure the Black Chief after her and away from U Dor, but in that he had failed. He now discovered that he might play his own Odwar into personal combat with Gahan, but he had already lost one Odwar and could ill spare the other. His position was a delicate one, since he did not wish to engage Gahan personally, while it appeared that there was little likelihood of his being able to escape. There was just one hope, and that lay in his Princess Panthan, so, without more deliberation, he ordered the piece onto the square occupied by the Black Chief. The sympathies of the spectators were all with Gahan now. If he lost, the game would be declared a draw, nor did they think better of drawn games upon Barsoom than do Earthmen. If he won, it would doubtless mean a duel between the two chiefs, a development for which they were all hoping. The game already bade fair to a short one, and it would be an angry crowd should it be decided a draw with only 2 men slain. There were great, historic games on record, where of the 40 pieces on the field when the game opened, only 3 survived: the 2 princesses and the victorious chief. They blamed U Dor, though in fact he was well within his rights in directing his play as he saw fit, nor was a refusal on his part to engage the Black Chief necessarily an imputation of cowardice. He was a great chief who had conceived a notion to possess the slave Tara. There was no honor that could not accrue to him from engaging in combat with slaves and criminals, or an unknown warrior from Manataj, nor was the stake of sufficient import to warrant the risk. But now the duel between Gahan and the Orange Panthan was on, and the decision of the next move was no longer in other hands than theirs. It was the first time that these Manatorians had seen Gahan of Gathol fight, but Tara of Helium knew that he was a master of the sword. Could he have seen the proud light in her eyes as he crossed blades with the wearer of the orange, he might easily have wondered if they were the same eyes that had flashed fire and hatred at him that time he had covered her lips with mad kisses, in the pits of the palace of O Tar. As she watched him, she could not but compare his swordplay with that of the greatest swordsman of 2 worlds, her father, John Carter of Virginia, a prince of Helium, warlord of Barsoom, and she knew that the skill of the Black Chief suffered little by the comparison. Short and to the point was the duel that decided possession of the Orange Chief's fourth. The spectators had settled themselves for an interesting engagement of at least average duration when they were brought almost standing by a brilliant flash of rapid swordplay that was over ere one could catch his breath. They saw the Black Chief step quickly back, his point upon the ground, while his opponent, his sword slipping from his fingers, clutched his breast, sank to his knees, and then lunged forward upon his face. and then Gahan of Gathol turned his eyes directly upon U Dor of Manator, 3 squares away. 3 squares is a chief's move. 3 squares in any direction or combination of directions, only provided that he does not cross the same square twice in a given move. The people saw and guessed Gahan's intention. They rose and roared forth their approval as he moved deliberately across the intervening squares toward the Orange Chief. O Tar, in the royal enclosure, sat frowning upon the scene. O Tar was angry. He was angry with U Dor for having entered this game for possession of a slave, for whom it had been his wish only slaves and criminals should strive. He was angry with the warrior from Manataj for having so far out-generaled and out-fought the men from Manator. He was angry with the populace because of their open hostility toward one who had basked in the sunshine of his favor for long years. O Tar, the jeddak, had not enjoyed the afternoon. Those who surrounded him were equally glum. They too scowled upon the field, the players, and the people. Among them was a bent and wrinkled old man who gazed through weak and watery eyes upon the field and the players. As Gahan entered his square, U Dor leaped toward him with drawn sword with such fury as might have overborne a less skilled and powerful swordsman. For a minute the fighting was fast and furious, and by comparison reducing to insignificance all that had gone before. Here indeed were 2 magnificent swordsmen, and here was to be a battle that bade fair to make up for whatever the people felt they had been defrauded of by the shortness of the game. Nor had it continued long before many there were who would have prophesied that they were witnessing a duel that was to become historic in the annals of Jetan and Manator. Every trick, every subterfuge known to the art of fence these men employed. Time and again each scored a point and brought blood to his opponent's copper hide until both were red with gore, but neither seemed able to administer the coup de grace. From her position upon the opposite side of the field, Tara of Helium watched the long-drawn battle. Always it seemed to her that the Black Chief fought upon the defensive, or when he assumed to push his opponent he neglected 1,000 openings that her practiced eyes beheld. Nor did he seem in real danger, nor never did he appear to exert himself to quite the pitch needful for victory. The duel already had been long contested, and the day was drawing to a close. Presently the sudden transition from daylight to darkness which, owing to the tenuity of the air upon Barsoom, occurs almost without the warning twilight of Earth, would occur. Would the fight never end? Would the game be called a draw after all? What ailed the Black Chief? Tara wished that she might answer at least the last of these questions, for she was sure that Turan the Panthan, as she knew him, while fighting brilliantly, was not giving of himself all that he might. She could not believe that fear was restraining his hand, but that there was something beside inability to push U Dor more fiercely she was confident. What it was, however, she could not guess. Once she saw Gahan glance quickly up toward the sinking sun. In 30 minutes it would be dark, and then she saw, and all those others saw, a strange transition steal over the swordplay of the Black Chief. It was as though he had been playing with the great dwar U Dor all these hours, and now he still played with him, but there was a difference. He played with him terribly as a carnivore plays with its victim in the instant before the kill. The Orange Chief was helpless now in the hands of a swordsman so superior that there could be no comparison, and the people sat in open-mouthed wonder and awe as Gahan of Gathol cut his foe to ribbons and then struck him down with a blow that cleft him to the chin. In 20 minutes the sun would set. But what of that? This is the end of the Chessmen of Mars, Chapter 17. Recording by Tom Weiss.